Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood with Hegwood Law Group, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning. Welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Dr. Dan Morhaim. And welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Kim. Thank you.
And so I always laugh and tell clients and everybody that, in my family, we talk about everything at the kitchen table, so there's not a subject that's off the, we discuss everything. So the big running joke is what we're going to do with mom when she's gone, so that's been the big running joke. But one of the things that we do talk to clients a lot about is quality of life. And so I think it's really good that you're on the show today because I think this is really important for our listeners to talk about, to really hear good information about choosing the best end of life possible. Because I think people don't get enough good information about, sometimes about how to die well, versus, the other options that there's out there. And so you were a former emergency room doctor, is that correct?
Well, yeah, 45 years of emergency medicine. I stopped doing hardcore clinical. I've worked primarily in big urban and suburban hospitals, but also rural hospitals, Indian reservation, overseas after Gulf War I in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So a pretty broad experience, but I'm still active in clinical things to this day, but I stopped finally doing hands-on day shifts, night shifts, weekends, and holidays at a certain point. So I confronted a lot of these issues frontline for many years, and that's how I got interested in this. And really the point is that we are the first generation in human history that likely has some say about how the end of life comes, and that's empowerment and valuable, and respect for our personal wishes. And what you may choose, what I may choose, may be different in different circumstances. So it's really something that topic we avoid. I get it, but we shouldn't, because we're empowered in new ways to have control over this, and I think it's really a valuable tool.
I tell everybody, my plan, if worst case scenario, is to fly first class to Switzerland, drink all the way with both hands, let them take care of me and then send me back, so because I know Switzerland has assisted suicide, and you don't have to be a Swiss citizen, to do it. So, so if I got something really bad, I'd want it to be, quick and painless. So the kids were like, yeah, we don't really want to talk about it either. And so, so what do you think that as far as, so you wrote a book, let's talk about the book.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
So you wrote a book called Preparing for a Better End.
Right.
Perfect.
I have a little trouble holding it up there, but there it is.
And so, and why did you feel that that this book needed to be written?
Well, this book is, first of all, it's from Johns Hopkins Press, and the website is www.thebetterend.com, thebetterend.com. It's a practical guide. It's not theory or fanciful. It's based on my 40 plus years as an ER doctor, also as a Maryland state legislator for 24 years and faculty at the Hopkins School of Public Health. So I had a lot of different kinds of experiences, and I saw so many families and so many individuals, for lack of completing free legal paperwork that's been around since 1991 called advance directives, found themselves in turmoil and crisis and chaos. And not that these documents are perfect, but it basically can guide clinical care, which I was rendering to folks. And so it's a taboo topic. I get it. We don't like to talk about this. But I felt if I could write a book that would just give practical information, here's the kinds of things that could happen to you. Here's how you might want to manage them. It's your choice, however, not my choice to impose on you as a clinician, but your choice. All made compounded by the COVID problem, because we used to have families at the bedside. We don't have families at the bedside, so there's a lot more communication issues. And I'm proud to say the book's been endorsed by a broad spectrum of people, including Maya Angelou, my previous book, United States senators. There's a evangelical Christian minister. I got a Buddhist meditator who's endorsed the book, a whole bunch of healthcare people, people from Baylor, chief of medical ethics at Baylor, and others. So a lot of folks, and people like this because it's just straightforward, simply written stories and factual guidance, so you know what to do. Take control of the end of your life. And I ask people this question when I do talks, and I'll do it now. So when the last moments of your life come, days, weeks, days, hours, minutes, where would you like to be? It's a 5-second mental exercise. Who's around you and what's going on? Just think about that. Where would you like to be?
Yeah, most people will tell you at home with
Right.
family.
At home with family, pain-free. And nobody says killed in a fiery car crash. Nobody says, drowning. No, everybody says the same thing. So we can have that, and it's a much more holistic, organic, family-centered, comfortable experience. What most people fear is isolation, pain, and dependency, and all those can be managed. And what's even more interesting is that almost all of those services that be provided to deal with this are free or already paid for, and we don't take advantage of them. Medicare covers hospice and palliative care. Health insurance covers palliative care. Advanced directives are free legal documents around since created under George Bush the first administration, created the federal law that allowed all the states to do this. And you can manage almost all those things well by taking advantage of it. So why not get what we want?
I tell all my clients, because we do advance directives, our directive to physicians, our living will, so we call it here in Texas. Mm-hmm. And I went back and changed the second page. Instead of giving clients an option over, writing in stuff because no one knows what to write, we listed out lots of options. Do you want a breathing machine? Do you want medications? Do you want, we just kind of listed them all because with choices, people are able to make better decisions if they know what kind of choices they need to make. So for us, it was very educational for to be able to do that. I always told them to go see their doctor, have a conversation with the doctor, take their directive in, and make sure that everybody was on the same page. And for free, I would change it if anything needed to be changed. But what, from your perspective, especially from an ER doctor, because you're doing things fast, it's not a come into the office and have a seat. You're doing things fast. What do doctors want in terms of end of life care? What makes your jobs easier and what helps the patient as well?
Well, first, I think what you're providing to your clients is really excellent. And by the way, there are other things they can put. For example, just to give you a flavor of mine says, take me outdoors as much as possible. I want control of the remote, and I like a bite of chocolate every day. Also, I don't know if your family has, but many families have an annoying relative who tends to dominate and run conversations. You can say, don't let cousin Fred in the room when you're discussing my end of life care. You can not only have the people you want, you may suggest some people you don't want around or don't want around all that much, especially when tough decisions are being made. So I really think you're doing a great job with that. But from the point of view of a doctor, I really want to respect patients' wishes. If it doesn't come from the patient, then who's going to make the decision? Typically, it might be a relative, a close relative, spouse, or adult child, but they may not have the conversation with you. But it often can default to a hospital committee. People who don't know you, don't know what your values are, don't know who you are. And I often, in an ER, I don't know my patients because they're not ongoing. Every patient is a new one to me. And so I want to respect what they would want. And I want to know how to communicate with their family and communicate with them. But if there's nothing there, for lack of completing a living will or an advanced directive, medical power of attorney, really all interchangeable terms, then I'm making the best decisions I can. But it's not really ultimately my decision that should be imposed on people. I do the best I can. So I want to know what patients want. And it makes a huge difference. And I've seen situations where there was no advance directives and there's chaos and families get in turmoil and fights. But one of the pivotal experiences in my early medical career was an elderly woman who had been living alone, collapsed with a major brain hemorrhage, as it turned out. I mean, we did the full workup and all that stuff, and the family was in turmoil. But she had completed an advance directive, and they were fighting over what to do about grandma, and people were sobbing and yelling at each other. And I had her advance directive, and I said, she says, no heroic efforts if there's no hope of recovery. And there was no hope of recovery from this massive intracranial bleed. And when I read it to them and said, I'm honored and legally bound to follow this, you might think things got more explosive. Actually, everybody calmed down. And I said, why don't you come into the room with me? I'm going to disconnect the tubes and machines that are keeping her going. And they all came in, and there was a very quiet moment in which I drifted to the back of the room and watched them, and they held her hand and stroked her brow, and she died peacefully in about an hour instead of being in some horrible vegetative state for a few days or a few weeks. And so what I saw, it really brought the family together instead of carrying a wound and a hurt for years. And sometimes these things go on in families for a long time. People get bitter. It brought them together. So I realized the value both from a positive point of view and the lack of having done this work from a negative point of view. But we're a culture, American culture, we value individual autonomy, respect for individual rights. But in this area, we collectively abdicate. Only about 40% of Americans have taken the steps that you and I are advocating. And I think it should be every person over the age of 18, an adult responsibility, not just for seniors.
And I find that my younger clients, the 18 to 25-year-olds, not real comfortable. Even my kids weren't when it came to trying to get them to sign advance directives, because they were just like, yeah, we don't talk about that, So we kind of leave it alone for the really, really young ones until they get a little bit older. But I know how important all this stuff is. But as an ER doctor, why do you think it's so important for you, for the clients, to have advance directives?
Well, again, it's guiding the care. But the three most famous cases in American medical legal history were women under 30, Cruzan, Quinlan, and Chivo. And as an ER doctor, younger people, if they haven't made those decisions, often get in trouble catastrophically. Trauma, subarachnoid hemorrhage without going into medical, these kinds of disasters. And so when you're 20, 25 years old, you think, why should I do this? I'm young and invincible. I get it. People like my age who are the path ahead is shorter than the path behind. But actually, it's really important. And things like organ donation become really valuable at that point as well. So I think it's just, if we make it normalize this. This is something you do as a responsible person. We wear our seatbelts. Chance of being in a car accident are small, but wearing your seatbelt helps. The chances of a young person getting in some kind of disaster, or any of us, is relatively small. But having completed the paperwork that we're advocating, which is available from many sources, AARP, mydirectives.com, which is a Texas company, by the way, free. I'm not pitching for them, but that's the best one. I've looked at them all to research them for my book. But CAKE is another. There are lots of sources of this. Different faiths have different versions consistent with their faith. So, you just have to fill the paperwork out, share it appropriately, and then go about your life and business and hope it doesn't come to pass. But if it does, which it will inevitably for all of us, you'll be prepared.
Yeah, we have all the different versions for the different faiths and things like that, because everybody's are just a little different, depending on your faith, and how you envision that. So let's talk about, tell our listeners what happens if you don't have one and you end up in the ER.
Well, chaos ensues, and I partly got into this because I found myself, I used to say we did these things to patients. I had to own it eventually and say I was doing the things to patients, because I was the person that was doing the endotracheal intubation, putting a breathing tube into the windpipe. I was the person ordering or having others do full cardiopulmonary resuscitation like you see on TV with the pounding on the chest. I was the person that was, because a lot of these patients didn't have good venous access, that is to start IVs, that's putting in central lines, large bore IVs in the jugular vein or the subclavian in the chest or the femoral in the leg, and doing all these things to patients, knowing that there wasn't really much hope for outcome of any kind, but that was the circumstances. And so these are the things, if you don't have one, they may happen. Now, if you want to have that, that's fine. If you want the full court press, you'll get it. And most people don't really want that when they know that there isn't. They want to have, they want to go home and be at home with medical cannabis, which you have in Texas and most states, or vodka, or things I described. And most people don't say just pull the plug arbitrarily. Most people choose a middle path, and that's what my advance directive says. I don't mind sharing. It says if I'm functioning reasonably well, relatively pain-free, keep me going. But if I get a terrible intercurrent illness, I want some basic help. But if it's going downhill, let me die in peace. Mm-hmm. And I've seen too many people lingering for weeks in intensive care units, no hope of recovery. Everybody really knows it medically. We don't necessarily say that to patients and families. But without an advance directive, nobody knows. And then it all falls to folks who don't know you making these decisions. And sometimes they're arbitrary or they're committee decisions, and that's not how it should be done.
And a lot of times we find that the people making the decisions have no idea what the person wants. So we tell clients all the time, you got to talk to your medical power of attorney agents. You got to talk to your spouse. People need to know what kinds of things are important, to you and what circumstances, So I think we were talking earlier,
yeah.
COVID really triggered a lot of people to really think about a lot of things because of so many people that were on ventilators and things like that, and
Right.
how they were coming off of those and what kind of shape they were in, and just people just passing away because COVID was so bad when it first started. And so I think it's really kind of brought it out a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, well, we've crossed bridges of taboo topics before. I think of Betty Ford, for example, who bravely talked about having breast cancer. And that made it possible for that discussion. People can talk about their child who may have a learning disorder that was uncomfortable, or epilepsy, for example. And now we can talk about that. I think we, can break down the barriers to talk about this topic, because it affects all of us ultimately. 80% of Americans die over time, 20% die suddenly. And here we have all the tools available. Look, I ran for office. I got elected 6 times. And 24 years, we have 4-year terms in Maryland in state legislature, 24 years. And I was out there and people would say, Delegate Morhaim, what are you working on? And I would say, all the usual topics, but let's also talk about your end of life care. Let's talk about death. And people said, are you crazy talking about that on the campaign trail? I like to be politicians who get elected by doing happy things. But and I would say, I want to talk about your death. And don't forget to vote for me in the next election, But they did. And what I found was that people were very appreciative that someone was willing to stand up and talk about this issue, because when I would get to it, people would say, or they come up to me afterwards, or even in these community meetings, they'd say, I'm really going through this now with my mother-in-law or my uncle or my spouse. And I had no one to talk to, no one to share. There was no discussion. And so we need to start having these discussions, just like we have about these other things, and make them like it's a normal thing. And actually to make our lives better for ourselves and our family. And actually, one other thing, you can save a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Medicare, which is about $900 billion, and the baby boom generation, which I'm in, is going to live longer and spend a lot of that money. End of life care is about $300 billion. And if folks made decisions generally choosing the middle path, I don't want to die in an intensive care unit unless it's actually where I should be. I mean, if I get a chest pain during this call, I want the ambulance to come and take me to the hospital. But if I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, long past any hope of recovery, I don't want a horrible death in an intensive care unit, long past any hope of recovery. I will take advantage of hospice care and palliative care. But if people exercise their choices, we could probably save 10 or 20 or 30% of that $300 billion, which is a really good way to save money, respecting individual rights, giving better, more compassionate and holistic care, as opposed to the usual things we do to save money in healthcare, create a system that nobody understands, shift burdens to taxpayers and employers, increase co-pays and deductibles, all this stuff. Save a lot of money the right way. So there's a legal and financial aspect, as well as the humanity, family-centered aspect to this.
Well, this has been very good. And so I just wanted to thank you immensely for coming on the show. So if somebody wants to get the book and get a hold of you, tell us how we can do that.
Well, you've got it right up there. That's my personal email, and I do answer them all. You've got my phone number. Email works better. And the book website is there. I do a lot of presentations and talks on this topic, and I would be happy to do that anywhere, virtually or in person, if that's possible. But I think the real bottom line here is this is something we can all address wherever you're on the political or faith spectrum. This is a common human experience, and we can make this a lot better in every aspect for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, for our state, for our nation. And all it really involves is getting that advance directive from your law firm or anywhere else, takes 15, you have to think about it, have some conversations. It takes about 10, 15 minutes to complete the form. You can update it anytime. So if your circumstances change your advance directive, health or relationships, spiritual orientation, change it. And then make sure it's available. This is not something that should be in a safety deposit box hidden away. It needs to be available. I use my directives. They have a QR code you can print out. So it's in my wallet. It's in the glove compartment of my car. I carry it with me all the time. Because if something happens, I go to the hospital, they can scan it and get all this information. Not only that, but some of my health history and so forth, which is really relevant. Again, as an ER doctor, patients come in, we don't know who they are sometimes or what medicines they're on or what their past history is. If I have that information right away, I can make better clinical decisions for them. So
Yeah.
It's free, it's easy. Let's just do it.
There you go. All right. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to getting your book.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So have a great week.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.